Hello, explorers, and welcome to another exciting adventure with our online aquarium. My name is Tiffany. I will be your host for today. Now, we are going to be learning about something that you probably don't often think about when it comes to the ocean. When it comes to the ocean, you're probably thinking about the fish. Maybe you're thinking you're going to be learning about sharks. We are actually going to be learning about some green stuff in the ocean. What do you think is green in the ocean? If you would like to participate with us today and communicate, let me know any questions you have or answers you have to my questions. I would love to chat with you. Our phone number is 562-286-1838. You can ask an adult, either your teacher or a parent or guardian, to text us any questions or observations you have to that phone number. If you are watching this not live and rather on our YouTube page, we would still love to hear your questions, but please email us at live@lbaop.org. Okay, where am I right now? What habitat is this? This is a place where we can see that animals live. Do you see anything that's green? Remember, I said we're talking about some green stuff today. So it's not an animal that we're talking about. Do you see all this green stuff? What is that? Have you been to the beach before? If you've gone to the beach before, you've probably seen seaweed roll up onto the beach, but when you've seen it, it's no longer alive, and it probably had bugs all over it, and it probably smelled. This is what kelp or seaweed looks like when it is in the water. Now, we aren't talking about just seaweed today. So seaweed is a type of algae, but we're also going to be talking about plants that live in the ocean. Did you know plants can live in the ocean? They can tolerate all of that salt water. That's pretty crazy. So this kelp forest wouldn't be a kelp forest without this algae, without this seaweed. But what exactly is this seaweed? Again, if you'd like to chat with us, our phone number is right down here. What is this seaweed? What are the benefits of it? What if we took away all of the kelp from this exhibit here? Do you think it would matter? I think so. Look at some of these fish that are hanging out in the kelp. It is their home. Some of the animals definitely eat kelp, so it is their food source. But go ahead, take a couple of moments. Does it look like a plant that we have on land? Think about plants that we have on land, like a tree or like a little flower sprouting up. Does it look the same as plants that we have on land? What are the parts of a plant on land? It kind of does look pretty similar to plants that we have on land, right? You can see a big fish. You can see it looks like it has leaves. It looks like it has, this is also kelp over here, it looks like it has a big stem. Now, what part of a plant goes into the ground, goes into the soil? The roots, right? Now, does this algae have roots? It's hard to see in this video, but it does have a structure that is very similar to roots, but doesn't work quite like roots. What is the purpose of roots on a plant? Do you know? Roots on a plant help bring up water to the plant and nutrients. That is not what the root-like structure does for this algae. Instead, do you see that all of this algae looks like it's growing out of a rock, isn't it? Can't get a lot of nutrients out of a rock like you can out of the soil, right? So the root-like structure that this algae has actually just helps it to hold on. If you have any paper or drawing materials with you, I am about to draw a little picture of this algae. If you would like to draw along with me, you may do so. Or you can just watch. That's okay too. So I'm over on my document camera. Hello! So looking at that kelp, there was all sorts of different types of kelp that we saw, but I'm going to draw a nice big giant kelp. And you might have noticed that that kelp was really moving around with the motion of the ocean. So I'm drawing a very squiggly line. And then we saw that it looked like the kelp had leaves, right? Now, they are not called leaves when it comes to this kelp. Because remember, kelp is very similar to a plant, but it is algae. So it's almost a more simple type of plant. So drawing all of those blades on there. Now, this part in the middle, that kind of looks like a stem. It's not a stem because it's not technically a plant, but we call it a stipe. Now, I said that the kelp has a root-like structure down at the bottom, and that root-like structure is called a holdfast. And sure enough, it does sort of look like a root, looks a lot like this, and all that does is help the kelp to hold on to the rocks, because I told you this kelp is moving around with the motion of the ocean, and the ocean waves can get really, really rough. And because they can get really, really rough, it would be very easy for this entire stalk here of kelp to just go away with the ocean and wash up onto shore if it wasn't rooted in those rocks. So it has to have that holdfast, holding onto those strong, strong rocks so that it doesn't basically blow away with that rough, rough waves. So this does look a lot like a plant that we have on land, and I'm going to label it kelp, K-E-L-P. So that is our kelp, and we will compare this kelp to a plant, because the next thing that we are talking about is some different kind of green stuff that we have in the ocean, but something that actually is a flowering plant, and that is this stuff here, seagrass. Doesn't this look a lot like grass that we have on land? Maybe you have grass at your house where you live. Maybe you have grass at school. This looks like this lot like grass that we have here on land. But do you think that we could take land grass and put it into the ocean? No, I don't think so. I don't think the land grass will really like to be in such salty, salty water. But this seagrass is a type of flowering plant that is adapted to live in the salty, salty ocean. Now, do you think it's going to have the same structure as a plant on land? Yeah. So it is going to have, in this case, it is just kind of like a stalk or a blade of grass, and it is going to have roots just like plants on land have roots, as opposed to the algae, the kelp, having the holdfast. So this is going to have roots, and it can even have flowers like we have on land as well. So it is a true plant that we have in the ocean. Now, what are the types of things that plants need? Because plants don't eat food like you and me, right? So how does this plant have energy? If you know or have any questions, you can feel free to text us. How does the plant get its energy? Now this is some seagrass that we have here at the aquarium. We have a beautiful marine meadows exhibit that showcases different types of seagrass. So what do you think? What does a plant need to survive? We can see one really big thing coming down from above, and that is sunlight. Plants are going to need sunlight in order to create their food. Just like this algae here, so this kelp, that's something that they have in common. We can see all that beautiful sunlight coming down, and they are going to do something called photosynthesis. They take energy from the sun and they use that to create sugars, and that sugars is their food that they need to grow up to be taller and taller and bigger of a plant. Now this algae, especially giant kelp, can grow really fast, up to a foot, maybe 2 feet per day. That is super fast. You can literally watch this algae grow. But that's the we were looking at. Can you imagine trying to watch your grass grow? It'll probably be really boring and you probably won't notice much change. But photosynthesis and the making its own food, making its own sugars, is how it gets energy. Now, plants provide a different benefit for us as well, don't they? What do plants provide people? Do you know? Go ahead and take in a big deep breath with me. And let it out. What did we just breathe in? We were breathing in air, and in that air is oxygen. Where does that oxygen come from? It can come from plants, right? But the plants take in something. So they let out oxygen, and we take in that oxygen. What do we breathe out? Do we breathe out the same oxygen? No, we breathe out carbon dioxide, and that is what the plants take in. So the plants take in carbon dioxide and they release oxygen into the environment. That sounds super helpful, especially considering all of the carbon dioxide that we are emitting into our atmosphere. So now let's go ahead and draw a plant. So we have our kelp here, and man, that kelp looks a lot like a plant. I'm going to draw a plant that looks similar to one we would see on land. So I have this stem, right? And we got some little roots. And those roots are in search of water and nutrients for the plant. And then maybe there is a beautiful flower at the top of this plant. Now, what is the point of the flower? Just to be pretty? They can be very beautiful, but that's not their only function. The flower has pollen, and that pollen helps to create more plants. So that is something that we see that is a little bit different between the plant and the algae, the kelp that we were talking about earlier. But some of the structures do look very similar. Like we see the roots and the holdfast look very similar. The stem and the stipe look very similar. And even having, let me add this onto my little plant here. It can also have little leaves, right? So the algae and the plant look very similar and have very similar structures. And same with our seagrass. It is going to have a root system that helps anchor it into the sand. and it is going to have those shoots or those blades of grass that shoot up and try to get that sunlight. Now, where do you think we are going to find the seagrass? Knowing that it needs to have roots that go into some sort of soil or sand, but it also needs access to sunlight. Do you think we're going to find it in the deep ocean? No, probably not. Where does it look like it is in this picture? There's the surface of the water right there. And only a few feet down, we find this bed of seagrass. Seagrass we are going to find very, very close to the surface because it needs that sunlight. That's where we're going to find this seagrass growing. Versus some of the algae that we have can grow deeper, even though they also need sunlight. Some things like the kelp grow really, really fast, and they grow up fast, fast, fast towards the sunlight. But this seagrass doesn't grow super long or super fast. We are going to find it pretty close to the surface of the water. But we can find it in almost all of our oceans. The only place we are not going to find this seagrass is near the continent of Antarctica. But everywhere else, we can find different species of marine plants in the ocean. Just minus where it is very, 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 very cold. The plants apparently do not like that. So, we talked about the differences between kelp and seagrass or plants. We talked about what plants need, but what are the benefits of seagrass? We said that they give us oxygen, which is super important for us. They take in carbon dioxide. But do you think there are any other benefits to seagrass? What if, in this picture, we just took out all of the seagrass? Would this be the same habitat? Would this be the same home for these animals? What do you think? It looks to me like these fish might be finding food in the seagrass. Maybe they eat the seagrass directly, or there's other animals hiding in the seagrass. So, let's take a look here. So look at this seagrass and algae. We see that moving around with the ocean waves. Look at that vibrant green color of that seagrass. Now, looking at how that seagrass is really moving around, do you think animals can hide in there? Oh, look at this fish. Yeah, definitely. Animals can hide in there, they can live in there, they can lay their eggs in there. So that's a lot of benefit for the animals that call this area home. It is their home. It's their grocery store, it's their nursery, it's their home. So that's a lot of benefits for the fish. And we talked about some benefits for us as well, but there's even more benefits for us than just, see, look at this. Do you see the animal that's living here? I already pointed to it. We have a ray right here. So remember, one of those things that seagrass needs is it needs to put its roots down into some sand or soil. So these soft sandy bottoms are where we are going to find, close to the surface, but is where we are going to find this seagrass growing. And again, you can see the surface of the water right there. So it's not super deep down to where we find the seagrass. Now, some animals that might be some of your favorite animals like to eat seagrass. Ooh, here are some more animals that call that sandy bottom or these marine meadows home. What is that animal? Kind of looks like a bug with a bunch of legs, doesn't it? It's a sea star. Now this sea star, as far as sea stars go, move speed. Look at how fast this sea star is moving. This is not sped up at all. You can see that vegetation in the background moving slowly. And that tells you that this is not a sped up video. This is just a really, really fast sea star. Look at how fast it's moving. And what? Did you just see that? It looked like a carpet of sand just went by. That was flatfish. But you can see how many different types of animals call this area home. And without that seagrass, well, it's not much of a place to live. There's nowhere to hide. Starfish, right? There's nowhere to hide, and some of the animals eat the seagrass and eat the algae. So it is important to have it as part of that habitat. Now, it also is possible to have an area that's just sandy, that doesn't have any seagrass. There are some threats to seagrass, which isn't good. Here we can see that fish that I said earlier looked like a blanket of sand that went by. This is one of our flatfish, perfectly adapted to blending in with the sand. But we can see a good look at some of the seagrass here in the back. All of this sand, when ocean waves are really get going, the sand can move in the ocean waves, and these plants and their root system help to anchor the sand together to help fight erosion. So that's another benefit to plants, or benefit of plants that benefits the entire habitat. They also clean the water. We talked about how they can clean the air, right? Because they take in the carbon dioxide, but they're also going to be cleaning and filtering the water that's around them. But like I said, there are some threats to seagrass. We can have some areas of a sandy bottom where we no longer see any seagrass. What do you think are some of the potential threats to these plants? What are threats to plants on land? You might think of people cutting down trees, or you might think of forest fires. Do you think forest fires are a problem for marine plants? No. So maybe the threats to plants on land aren't the same as threats to plants in the ocean. But one big threat to these ocean plants is going to be pollution. Pollution is going to be a big problem for these plants and can wipe out entire species of these plants. And then we already said how this is the home for many animals, the food for animals, the nursery for animals. So it's a pretty big problem if we wipe out an area of seagrass. Some other issues can be development that we have on land. Stuff that we are doing on land impacts the ocean. When sediments from land run off into the ocean, all of those sediments can cover these seagrasses, and these seagrasses need access to the sunlight. If they get covered in sediment, that's a big problem. And also something called dredging. When something is being dragged behind a boat in the ocean because maybe they're trying to catch animals that hang out on the sea floor. But guess what? That practice also catches a lot of other things, like plants that kind of get ripped up from their roots. So all of these are threats and issues for these sea plants. But is it all bad news? Is there anything that people can do to help these seagrasses? What do you think? Is there anything that people can do to help plants on land? Have you ever practiced gardening or planting anything, maybe at school in a community garden or maybe where you live? Do you think that helps out plant life on land? Yeah, definitely. And just like we can restore plant life on land, like our wetlands, by adding in more native plants, or in the forest, by, again, taking out invasive plants and adding in native plants, we can do the same thing in our oceans. We can plant these native grasses into areas that have been damaged and help out the local species. Now let's take a look at some animals that call seagrass home, or that eat seagrass. Let's see what we can find. Oh, okay. Now, there is animal that blends seagrass and with kelp. So we can see a couple of these fish, right? A couple of those fish really stand out, but there is a fish hanging out in here that has perfect coloration to help it camouflage or blend in with the seagrass. Do you think you saw it? This fish right here, do you see how it has kind of broken up stripes of like brown or green and white? That is to mimic what we see right here with this seagrass, where we see blades of seagrass going up like long stripes, but then in between the blades of seagrass, we see white or blue. And so that fish has that same striping pattern, so that as it is hanging out and swimming in the seagrass, predators cannot see this animal very well because of its coloration and its patterns. What about the other fish? Do you think they blend in very well with the seagrass? Definitely not as well as this fish right here. Some of these other fish just blend in general, with the ocean in the background being kind of that silvery color, but that fish is perfectly adapted to blending in with the seagrass. Now, here is a great video. Because it's moving around, you can see it pretty well, but this kelpfish is again perfectly camouflaged to blend in with kelp and seagrass. You can see how its coloration and its patterns, it honestly looks like a piece of kelp. But since kelp and the seagrass, the plants, look pretty similar, this animal can really hide in both areas and be perfectly hidden from predators. So like I said, animals can live in the seagrass. They can camouflage perfectly in with the seagrass. They can eat the seagrass. We have in this exhibit here animals that are laying their eggs in the seagrass. So it is a very important habitat that is very local to us. I am in Long Beach, California, so here in Southern California, this is a very local habitat. We have not only our huge kelp forests that grow out of the rocks, but out of the sandy bottom grows a lot of these marine plants. And I have seen some of these seagrasses all the way up the tide pools. So if you have gone to the beach before and you saw some vibrant green stuff that looked like grass, it was grass. It was just marine grass. All right, explorers, I hope that we have added to your knowledge of plants today. We were able to look at a beautiful local kelp forest and make observations of that kelp, that algae, and compare how it is similar or different to the marine plants that we have. We talked about what plants need in order to survive, and guess what? Our ocean plants need the same stuff as our land plants need. We talked about the benefits of these ocean plants, but then also the threats, the potential threats to these ocean plants. All right, it looks like we are all out of time for today, but if you do have any questions, we would love to hear from you. You can email us at live@lbaop.org. Until next time, I hope you have a great rest of your day.